regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I'm glad you're with me on the program today. We're going to be talking with a gentleman who has not appeared on the program before, but I'm really glad that he was able to carve out a couple of minutes to chat with us. Vinno Varghese is an attorney in New York City. He is the attorney representing Dexter Taylor. Dexter Taylor is the Brooklyn man who is currently serving a 10-year sentence. He's sitting in a maximum security prison in New York State, about 2 hours north of New York City, for the violent crime of making his own guns and not getting a Second Amendment permission slip from New York City to manufacture and possess those guns. We have covered Dexter Taylor's story at Bearing Arms. Jeff Charles has done a fantastic job of covering Dexter Taylor's story at Red State. But we've not had the chance to speak with Dexter Taylor's attorney until now. I can promise you this will not be the last time that you will hear from Mr. Varghese. But I wanted to reach out and talk to him when I saw this story last week out of the New York Post about another individual, this time in Manhattan, who took a guilty plea to, I think it was criminal possession of a firearm. But in essence, he was charged with making homemade guns as well. He did not get 10 years in a maximum security prison as a result of his plea deal. I think he's going to serve between 1 1/3 to 4 years in prison, which is still, I think, an injustice given the fact that we're talking about, again, something that shouldn't be a crime to begin with, right? Manufacturing your own firearm. That's something that has been a part of the national tradition of gun ownership for as long as this country's been around. In fact, even before this country was a country, back when we were colonies of Great Britain, home-built firearms were still a thing. And of course, it is allowed under a federal law in our Constitution. The Biden administration tried to crack down on home-built firearms, but litigation, I think, is going to be very successful in challenging that ATF rule if it is not formally undone by the Trump administration. But we're not talking about a federal law here, right? We're talking about New York State law. That was what was used by the Brooklyn DA to go after Dexter Taylor. And as you will hear from Dexter Taylor's attorney, Taylor himself was offered a plea deal, but he turned it down because he is fighting not only for his right to build his own gun, but he's fighting for your right, too. Take a look and a listen. Mr. Varghese, thanks so much for coming on the program. It was good talking with you today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, so the first question I've got to ask is, how is your client Dexter Taylor holding up?
He's great. I mean, he is just such a inspiration to me, to so many people. He's just eternally positive. And, he is certainly at peace with himself and the decision he made to fight this and become he realized the case was bigger than himself, and he took on that sacrifice to preserve, to protect the Constitution, even though it came at great personal cost to himself.
Absolutely. Great personal cost, right? So 10-year sentence. The last story I saw was that Mr. Taylor is in a maximum security prison. Is that still where he is located?
Yeah, he's at a place called Coxsackie in upstate New York. It's about 2 hours north of New York City. I'm in Manhattan. I'm downtown on Wall Street. So it's about 2+ hours from here, which actually makes it pretty reasonable for his family, his kid who's 16 to come and see him.
I guess that is a small blessing. I'm still gobsmacked that he is sitting in a maximum security prison for the crime, quote unquote, of making his own guns. Again, this was not a violent, in any reasonable sense, this is not a violent offense. I understand that New York may classify this as a violent felony.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's part of the problem here, right? Is that New York's laws, I mean, we're talking about layer upon layer of infringement on our Second Amendment rights.
I listen, having tried the case or having defended him for over 2 years prior to getting to trial, we had filed motions to dismiss. We believe we have strong constitutional grounds to get the case dismissed. I predicted, and I told Dexter this, and this is why he's my hero, because he knew that we were going to lose in New York state courts. And the only relief he was going to get was ultimately to get to federal court. But the only way to get to federal court is to lose here in New York State trial court, lose at the mid-level appellate court, and then lose in New York's highest court, which is in Albany. So the irony of all this is that he's got to lose 3 times. His case was in Brooklyn in the trial court. He's got to lose in the mid-level appellate court, which is also in Brooklyn. Then he's going to lose in Albany, only to get back to federal court in Brooklyn, which is right across the street. I mean, it's kind of just the way that the system works. You can't get to federal court with the state court case unless you've gone through all the appeals in state court.
Yeah. So where are you all in the appeals process right now?
We're still putting together the actual appeal. He actually has some New York State issues that are completely separate from the Second Amendment and how the trial was conducted.
Okay.
So, and they're worth exploring. I have to explore them as his lawyer, and but we envision that the courts are just going to affirm the appellate court, the intermediate mid-level appellate court, which is called the Second Department and sits like across the park in Brooklyn, is going to, affirm the judge and let the case proceed. And then we'd have to take the appeal to Albany. And, it's funny to say this, like, it's not funny, but it is funny to say this. When we lose there, we have a shot to win,
right?
Which is in Brooklyn Federal Court, called the Eastern District of New York.
But the wheels of justice grind so slowly, and the criminal justice system is not exactly speedy.
Correct.
I mean, there is a very real possibility that Mr. Taylor is going to serve the majority of his sentence before he has a chance for relief in the federal courts, right?
That's correct. And that's why what the judge did was the first word that comes to my head. And I have to be careful because, look, as a lawyer, there's a limit to my First Amendment rights. We're not talking about the Second Amendment here. I have much more limited First Amendment rights, but I believe than the citizen, right? So I criticize this judge quite heavily in when I was interviewed by multiple people like yourself, and also Newsmax interviewed me. Some of the papers interviewed me. She was her sentence is outrageous. And to put things in perspective, I'm just going to pull up a couple of things that I wanted to bring to your attention, right? So she, let me, using magazine. There's a writer from Reason magazine, which is a libertarian publication.
Mm-hmm.
So his name is Billy Binion. I give him credit because he figured all this stuff out without even speaking to me or Dexter right after the conviction. And he talked about him getting sentenced to Dexter Taylor, getting sentenced to 10 years. It's that, a guy in Brooklyn in the same courthouse got a 7-year sentence who repeatedly sexually assaulted a young girl. A guy who killed somebody, second-degree manslaughter, got 3 to 9 years. And a woman who stole $1 million from 9 people got sentenced to 3.5 to 7 years. All, as he puts, Billy Binion, and I've been speaking to Billy because he's looking to do a Reason magazine further thing on Dexter, is that all of those crimes had victims.
Yeah.
And yet all of those perpetrators will spend significantly less time in prison than Dexter will, who never even fired that gun.
Right. That's the thing. I mean, I ran across
Never took it out of his home.
Yeah. I mean, I ran across a couple of stories. This was not in Brooklyn, but it was in New York State, where two armed robbers, who I believe were from my state of Virginia, were convicted of armed robbery in New York. I think they got 4 years. So even combined, their sentence wasn't as long as what Dexter Taylor has received.
Dexter was punished for fighting the system.
So, to that end, the New York Post had a story last week, which was one of the reasons why I reached out to you again. There's a model, actress, influencer. I confess I hadn't heard of her. I guess I'm out of the loop. Her name is Julia Fox. Her brother, Christopher, was charged with criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree for making guns with his 3D printer. And this was in Manhattan. And he did take a guilty plea to criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree. He got a sentence of 1 to 1 1/3 years to 4 years in prison with that guilty plea. Now, again, that is significantly less than what your client has received. I suppose pleading guilty, you got the reduced charges. Maybe that explains it. But it seems pretty clear to me that, as you say, Dexter Taylor was punished for defending himself in a court of law, for not, right. Was a plea deal offered him?
So, yes, in essence, they made a deal. They made a recommendation.
Okay.
They would plead to the top charge and do 8 years. But the reality was, I could have gone to the judge before we litigated this, and I suggested this. I said, I have an ethical obligation to inform you that I can take a different route to reduce your jail sentence, which is to ask the court to sentence you to the minimum charge, right? And which is 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
He would not allow me to do that. He
Okay.
told me under no circumstances will you do that.
Yeah. And
so in essence, if you saw, there was, he had a realistic shot at getting 3.5 years if he pleaded guilty.
If he had pled down. Right. But yep. It's the principle of the thing.
He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't even allow me to make the request.
I know that you said that as an attorney, and particularly as Mr. Taylor's attorney, your First Amendment rights are a little limited. But do you think it's fair to say that Dexter Taylor is a political prisoner of New York State?
Yes. I mean, I think that his case is extreme. And his sentence is almost 3 times the mandatory minimum. Now, there's an argument to be made that each of those guns could have, if he had hit him consecutively, would have been even a higher sentence. But that's not even reasonable considering who he was.
Right.
And what a good citizen he was and is. So that's just objectively unreasonable. But, I want to read to you, because we have the benefit of the transcript, is that, she precluded me from relitigating the Second Amendment. And she goes, Second Amendment claims will not be permitted. That's one of the things she says. She said to me that you are free, our arguments to pursue on appeal regarding Second Amendment, but in New York, that is not the law. And I have a responsibility to work with lawyers to identify jurors who are appropriate for this case, who are qualified to serve in this case, and not to confuse them, and to give them to determine they have the tools necessary to be served on this case. He then goes on to say, I cannot allow the jurors to be confused, thinking that the Second Amendment, as you are interpreting, this is her talking to me,
right,
as you are interpreting it, trumps any decision or any law that they hear from me about what the law in New York is. So to the extent that you're questioning, you are seeking that in your questioning, you are seeking to test or advance as the Second Amendment permits the activity that your client is alleged to have engaged in or conducted. That is not permissible.
That is, I recall seeing that at the time. And again, just being stunned that a judge would say, you're not allowed to bring up the Constitution as a defense for your client's actions. You're not allowed to talk about the enumerated right to keep and bear arms before the jury, because that might confuse them. The jury may not have been confused, but I would say that there are some jurors who are probably blissfully ignorant of the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms, given the hostility that the state of New York and New York City lawmakers have exhibited towards that right. Again, it is bizarre to me. And I'm not an attorney, but I got to ask you, how unusual is it for a judge to say you can't bring up the implications of a constitutional right in defense of your client?
So on that, your question is actually the answer to your question is actually a simple one. A judge can do that.
Yeah.
Can rule out or preclude a lawyer from making an argument as to what she believes is not relevant to this case. This actually happens a lot.
Okay.
There are certain things you're not allowed to argue. But the problem for this judge and the problem with this case is that it prevented me from asserting any defense, right? So I have a right to present a defense which actually implicates the Sixth Amendment and the right to a fair trial. So by telling me that I could not even discuss the Second Amendment, she effectively precluded, me from speaking on a First Amendment basis about the Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial.
So is this, I know that you said that you're working on the appeal right now, but is this going to be one of the arguments that you make in your appeal, that the judge was incorrect in denying you to make these arguments and present this information to the jury?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because she precluded us from making any defense.
Yeah. Again, it is just, I have the utmost respect for Dexter Taylor. As you say, his principles, come at a cost, right? And I'm not sure that if I were in that similar situation, I'm not sure what I would do. I'd like to be able to say that I would do exactly as Mr. Taylor's done, but yeah, it's a tough call. 10 years behind bars. That's a long time. It's a long time to spend away from your kids. It's a long time to spend away from your family. It's a long time to spend away from freedom, from being able to walk outside whenever you want, to be able to order what you want to eat for dinner, right? To be able to go to the range. That is, and Dexter Taylor knew, as you say, he knew what the cost would be, and he chose to do this. And it sounds like not just for his sake, but for others who might find themselves in similar circumstances.
Yeah, he's an inspiration. So I have two young sons who are at the time 12 and 9. I've never brought them to watch a trial, and I've done a lot of trials in my career. I thought it was important for them to meet Dexter, to see Dexter, and to hear the arguments. So when Dexter testified, they were there, and there was during my closing arguments and the prosecutor's closing arguments, they were there. They missed school on 3 days, and they came for Dexter's sentencing because I wanted them to, and they were distraught, as were all of Dexter's supporters, with the sentence. But Dexter, he made his statement. He made this wonderful statement to the court, and basically, and not so, couched words and not so hidden words, basically said, I am a political prisoner, that he was a political prisoner. The argument I made was that, I made the argument, I said, anybody. And, you look at this guy who's been a great citizen, who, never had no prior criminal history, he didn't deserve anything but the minimum.
Yeah.
So.
I've got to ask you, were you interested and active in Second Amendment cases before Dexter Taylor hired you as his attorney? And how has this case impacted you? Has it made you more interested in taking on New York's gun control laws, or maybe even some of the federal gun control laws that we have in place around the country?
I mean, the reality was that I wasn't. The issues, I deal with constitutional issues all the time, but they're generally Fourth and Sixth Amendment issues, right? So, Fourth in terms of search and seizure, and Sixth Amendment issues in terms of the rights, confrontation clause, the right to cross-examine witnesses. There are so many rights in the Sixth Amendment that deal with criminal issues, right? That's where everything is there. So I've litigated numerous Sixth Amendment issues and occasionally a First Amendment issue, because there are times that I've said to, like, for example, when I've had clients who were prosecuted for things they've said, and I've made First Amendment arguments that these are not, these are permissible whether you like them or not, you found them distasteful. These aren't criminal, right? But this was the first time that I've litigated a Second Amendment issue. And the internal impact that it's had on me, so many people have reached out to talk to me. And, we get a lot of Second Amendment calls since this case, Yeah. Another client that hired me because he saw my advocacy for Dexter and saw me on some of the podcasts talking about Dexter together before he went to jail, including an interview on Newsmax.
Yeah.
So, I was one client saw that and hired me because he had a gun issue. But we didn't have to raise the Second Amendment because they had a Fourth Amendment problem. He was illegally searched.
Aha.
So, and we were able to get him taken care of via the Fourth Amendment. So.
Oh, that I'm glad that he at least was able to get some relief from the judicial system, and I hope that Dexter Taylor is eventually able to get that same relief. And Mr. Varghese, again, I really appreciate you coming on the program. Let me just ask. I mean, if I know that a lot of folks who are going to be watching this and listening to this want to support Dexter Taylor, how can they do that? How can they show their support for him?
This is lengthy. It is things. So there's been a give, send, go. He's had a lot of support to that. If you put that.
I'm sorry, I think we've lost your audio here. So, yeah. But you did mention a give, send, go. So we will. All right. We're having some audio issues. But we will definitely let folks know about that give, send, go. And again, Mr. Varghese, I really do appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. My thanks to Mr. Varghese for joining us on the program, and apologies for the audio difficulties we had there at the end. But there is a give, send, go that has been set up if you want to help with Dexter Taylor's legal defense. All you have to do, go to give, send, go, just look up Dexter Taylor. You can find that information there. And if you are as outraged as I am by the injustice that is being done here, I would encourage you to support Dexter Taylor's appeal. All right, let's turn our attention now to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. We'll start there with a case out of Palo Alto, California, where a 19-year-old man who robbed a mail carrier has avoided prison. 3 years probation, 8 days behind bars while he was after he was arrested. That's pretty much the entirety of the sentence that Trevion LeVar Williams will receive. He agreed to pay his victim $8,083 in restitution, in addition to going on 3 years of felony probation. He is facing charges still in San Mateo County, where he is accused of robbing another postal worker on the same day, along with a 17-year-old accomplice. According to the Palo Alto Daily Post, it was May 11th of last year when the pair allegedly attacked a woman who was delivering mail. Williams allegedly grabbing the woman by the throat, then throwing her down to the ground as she screamed. He grabbed her fanny pack, according to San Mateo County DA Steve Wagstaff. And then about an hour later in Palo Alto, Williams and the teenager accused of robbing another mail carrier, where the 17-year-old allegedly pointed a fake gun at the postal worker's head. Williams then grabbed the postal worker and shook him. Officials, or rather officers, found their car leaving the neighborhood. They tried to stop Williams, who was behind the wheel, but he ended up taking off and eventually crashed into a tree. The car, by the way, allegedly reported stolen out of Alameda about 2 weeks earlier, had a license plate that had been stolen from a different car in Hayward, California, the same day as the robberies. Palo Alto Daily Post says the stolen license plate would allow Williams to avoid detection by license plate reading cameras that police have installed throughout the Bay Area. Officers found 2 mail keys. They found 2 fake guns on the site of the crash. And again, Williams gets a plea deal. In fact, less than a month after this incident took place, less than a month after he was arrested, the DA's office offered him this sweetheart deal. And frankly, he would have been an idiot not to take it. I don't fault Mr. Williams for accepting the plea deal. I do fault the prosecutor in this case, Supervising Deputy District Attorney Sandy Patel, with offering that plea bargain. Again, you've got eyewitnesses, right, in the form of these victims. You've got plenty of physical evidence. In fact, not only should Patel have either taken this case to trial or offered a deal that resulted in some prison time, we're talking about the robbery of 2 postal workers. Patel arguably should have referred this case to the local U.S. attorney for prosecution. This should have been moved to federal court, in my opinion, because you're talking again about the robberies of federal employees. But Patel didn't do that either. I mean, that might have resulted in some actual prison time. Can't have that in California now, right? So here you got a 19-year-old who has basically been told by the criminal justice system, don't get caught, and there won't be any consequences. And if you do get caught, really not any consequences either. I mean, just keep your nose out of trouble for the next 3 years and you'll be good to go. Again, absolutely unbelievable. It is an injustice of a completely different kind compared to what we were just talking about with Dexter Taylor, sort of the other end of the spectrum here. Somebody who's not behind bars who should be, when Dexter Taylor, who should not be behind bars, is. All right, on to today's Armed Citizen story from Magnolia, Texas, which is about 50 miles outside of Houston. Also, the scene of a defensive gun use where a retired police officer shot a stranger who was refusing to leave his daughter's home. The woman's neighbor also involved in this defensive gun use as well, according to local authorities. This was February 24th, sometime in the evening of February 24th. This woman in Magnolia said a stranger showed up not only at her home, but made his way inside her home and then refused to leave. So first she called her neighbor, who is a Houston police officer. He's off duty. He's home at the time. And she called her father, who's a retired Houston police officer. Both men showed up, and the intruder was still there inside the house. According to authorities, the intruder continued to make threats. It's unclear if the threat was directed solely at the woman or if now the threats encompassed the 2 individuals who had shown up there. But both the woman's father and her neighbor ended up shooting the intruder when he continued to make those threats. He was taken to a local hospital for medical treatment after life-saving measures performed at the scene. Deputies in Montgomery County continued to investigate this incident, but again, at this point, it would appear to be a clear-cut justifiable use of force. You've got somebody who's in a home where they're not allowed to be. They're making physical threats against the resident of that home and perhaps the individuals who showed up. You have a right to defend yourself in that circumstance. I am extremely glad that the woman's neighbor was home, that her dad apparently lived a short distance away, and that both of these individuals were able to get there in time to protect her. But I also hope that dad and the neighbor are now encouraging this woman to get training and get a gun herself, because there is no guarantee that when you pick up the phone and say, I need help, there's somebody in my house that is going to arrive in time And I hope that in the future, God forbid this doesn't ever happen to her again, but I hope in the future, if it does, that she is able to protect herself with more than the phone in her hand. Finally today, our good deed of the day, in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. A story from my neck of the woods. A woman who saved a toddler who was wandering into a busy intersection. This was in Chesterfield, Virginia, Richmond suburb, about an hour away from where I live, outside of Farmville, Virginia. Latoya Parham said she had just dropped her kids off at school last Friday, and she was driving back from dropping her son off. She had stopped at an intersection, and she noticed a little boy run into the road, and she said, I realized no one's with him. Apparently, the kid had wandered away from the Fortress of God child care, which I got to tell you, if a kid can wander out into the road, you need to upgrade your fortress, right? Officers say a bus driver saw the boy, stopped their bus. A few other people, including Parham, left their cars to get the child out of the road and into a safe place. Parham said, when I first saw the toddler running the street, all I could think of as a single mom was, oh my God, this is probably somebody's worst fear coming to life right now. She said, I just put on the brakes in my car. I jumped out immediately. I ran to him. I grabbed him. I just held him like he's my child because I could not imagine somebody finding my child in the middle of the road in a busy intersection. The child was not injured. Didn't have a coat on because probably just, I guess, was not outside. I guess wandered out of the building and then into the street. Officers went to the child care center, but as local media reports, there are still questions about how the child was able to walk away. WWPT in Richmond quoted Parham as saying, I sympathize with the parents because I cannot imagine dropping my child off at a daycare and then getting a call from the police department saying they've got my child. She says she's saying, well, that she was in the right place at the right time. She says, it only takes a minute for something bad to happen. And I definitely felt as though I was in the right place for a reason, and I am grateful. Absolutely. You know, I know that I've shared this story before on this program, but when I was 2 years old, we moved from Massachusetts to Oklahoma, and we'd only been there maybe a couple of months. When we moved, my family got a dog, and the dog was a puppy too. And so one afternoon, again, a couple of months after we moved to Oklahoma, I'm in the backyard playing with mud. The dog is with me, and my mom's inside making me lunch. And I managed to get the latch on the gate to the back fence open. And my dog and I wandered away. I don't remember any of this, by the way. I mean, I was 2. But I have heard this story so many times growing up. So I was eventually found about a half mile away from my house, walking down the median of a 4-lane road. And these 2 very nice ladies saw me and my dog. Apparently I was, as you can imagine, freaking out at that point, right? I didn't know my address. I was 2. I'm not even sure I knew my name at that point. I certainly didn't know my phone number, but our dog, Taffy, who, again, had only been with us for a couple of months, they put me in the car, and Taffy actually led them back to our house, believe it or not, where my mom was freaking out. She'd already called the police, and then these 2 nice ladies show up, and here I am. Here's the dog. Everything's okay. So, again, I don't remember any of this, but when I see stories like this, I am so grateful that there are good Samaritans out there who will not just drive by and say, you know what, I'm going to let somebody else deal with this. So Latoya Parham, the bus driver there in Chesterfield, all of the other folks who stopped their cars, who were concerned about the this little child walking down the middle of the road, I thank you all for your very good deed. And again, not sure how this happened, but Fortress of God Child Care, sounds like maybe some additional fortifications are necessary. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. I want to thank you very much for being a part of the program today. I'm really looking forward to being back with you again on Monday, when our guest will be Larry Keene from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We have a lot of stuff to talk about with the Trump administration. There's some concern about, these the pause on firearm expert permits, at least processing firearm expert permits. The licenses that are already out there are still in force, but there's some confusion about new licenses being issued. Also want to talk with Larry Keane about Kash Patel being the named as the interim ATF director and what that means for the firearms industry. And Tuesday next week, we've got oral arguments in Smith & Wesson versus Mexico. So we'll talk with Larry Keane about Mexico's lawsuit against U.S. gun makers and the prospect, fingers crossed, that the Supreme Court will shut down this attempt to do an end run around the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. So a very important conversation with Larry Keane coming up on Monday. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, your Friday, the weekend ahead. Be sure to check out BarronArms.com for all of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. If you like what you see, I would also encourage you to become a VIP Gold, or VIP Platinum member. All you have to do is just click that VIP button on the website. Use the promo code FIGHT, and you can get 60% off your VIP Gold, or VIP Platinum membership. Every tier comes with its own benefits. But no matter what tier you choose, you'll be supporting the independent pro-Second Amendment journalism that we're doing at Bearing Arms, and that is critically important. Even when you've got Jeff Bezos out there saying, we're going to start promoting personal liberties of the Washington Post. I don't believe it. I'll believe it when I see it. And even if they do, the media bias is still rampant. We do need your help. And we certainly do appreciate your support. We'll see you back here on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.